Good morning, everyone. Can I remind you all that this meeting is being broadcast live over the internet, so you're all on camera. Please be aware that you may be visible on screen when people around you are speaking, and please remember to speak clearly into your microphones. This meeting is available to view online and in the future, whenever and wherever people want to watch it. We welcome the use of the Welsh language at meetings. I have had no request for people to speak Welsh today, so this meeting will be conducted in English only. I would like to welcome everyone attending the meeting today and anyone watching the meeting via the webcast. Please can all mobile phones and other noisy devices please be put on silent. If there is an emergency alarm, follow the green signs and go to the ground floor of the Civic car park. Now we go straight to agenda item 1, which is attendance and apologies. Have you got any apologies this morning?
Yes, Chair, we've got apologies from Councillor Glencairn.
Thank you. Declarations of interest. Anybody got any declarations of interest?
Page 21, 102, 117, 139, 166, 195 and 221.
Right, thank you, Councillor. Right, we go to the minutes of the Licensing Committee, which is on pages 3 to 10. Are you all happy with the minutes of the Licensing Committee?
Yeah, I move those, Chair.
Thank you, Seconder. Thank you. Right, we go straight on to item number 4, which is workload update April to September 2019, which is pages 11 to 90. Alison?
Thank you, Chair. As we've got quite a bit to get through today, would you like me to run through this quite quickly or in detail? Would that be more suitable? Thank you. Okay, so if we move straight on to then to item number 5 on this, issues and findings and operational matters, looking at the alcohol and entertainment side of things, we had 27 premises that were subject to complaints in this period, and just to confirm, this is covering the first half of the year because we're just doing half yearly at the moment. You've previously agreed to that because of the workloads we're currently carrying. So that's 27 premises were complained about in the first half of the year. We were dealing with noise complaints, events taking place without a licence or outside the licensed activities. We've also had allegations of drugs and underage alcohol sales. Of the 5 complaints that concerns noise, all one-off complaints and have been dealt with by the public health team. And that's a common pattern over the summer months. People complain, but then we don't get any further events. There were 2 panel hearings, one at which a personal licence was refused, and then we had a premises application that was subject to additional licence conditions. A further report was withdrawn following negotiation between the parties. Looking at the applications that we've had, objections were received from Environmental Health on the grounds of prevention of public nuisance in relation to 2 temporary event notices. However, following discussion with both notice givers, both agreed to modify their notices and reduce the time that the live music would be performed in order to prevent noise nuisance to neighbours, etc. An application was received during the second quarter for a club premises certificate authorising the provision of licensable activities for members and bona fide guests. We had representations on from the police and environmental health, but again, the club agreed to licensing conditions that allow those objections to be withdrawn. We also had objections from residents, and that application was heard by the licensing panel. Both the residents and the applicant spoke at the hearing, and after consideration of the facts and the information provided to them, the panel granted the club premises certificates. We've also dealt with applications to vary licences to cater for sporting events. As you may be aware, I do believe there was a rugby event that occurred somewhere in the world. And obviously what we do have with these, where we have big events that occur in other parts of the world, is that a lot of people then find that their current licences don't cover when they'd like to be open for those events to be shown. So we had quite a few tents coming in on those and quite a few applications to vary their licence. Are there any questions or queries regarding the licence event?
Were the 4 applications for, like the Rugby World Cup agreed?
Was it the activities?
Yeah.
Yes, they went through. I believe it would have been Claire dealing with those.
Yes, all applications were agreed. Some were subject to additional conditions as requested by the police in order to prevent any potential crime and disorder or public nuisance, but all 4 applications were granted.
I think it's also worth commenting that a lot of these sporting events aren't requiring extensions of licensing times into the evenings. They're actually morning events. So pubs are actually looking to open, say, 8 o'clock in the morning, start serving bacon rolls, etc. But we don't have the late night noise issues, related to a lot of these events. Some of the boxing events, I think, come in overnight, but the rugby and the football so far haven't. Moving on to then Hackney and private hire licensing, we've dealt with 29 complaints in all over the 6 months, including about inappropriate behaviour, late non-arrival of vehicles and smoking and vaping. We've actually had 3 complaints related to inappropriate behaviour towards young girls. Those drivers were immediately interviewed. They gave explanations that indicated inadvisable rather than unacceptable behaviour, and when we explained to them how their behaviour appeared from the outside and what it could mean in terms of safeguarding, they took those points on board. What we've done is issued them with written warnings regarding future conduct so they know exactly what's expected of them. We have had an issue with a private hire operator with extensive businesses in Newport and Cardiff that made an application to us in August. This application complied with the licensing of policy and was therefore approved by officers. Subsequently, a considerable number of queries and concerns were received from other taxi operators and drivers in the Torvine area, and they were alleging breaches of the law and asking what steps they could take in respect of the new competition that they now faced. The evidence submitted to the authority in respect of the complaints actually showed that the vehicles in question were behaving correctly and in the same way as other Torvine licensed vehicles. Trade competition is not a matter covered by licensing legislation or the policy and cannot be considered as part of the licence approval process. The new private hire operator offered customers an app-based booking system which benefited customers, and actually this is now being offered by some of the other private hire operators in the area. So what's basically happening is they've stepped up their offering to customers as well. Moving on from that, we've made a number of visits to local taxi ranks and other areas where licensed vehicles congregate. We've been carrying out spot checks there. We've found a few minor defects and issues, and we've given advice as appropriate, but I think we're fairly pleased that we didn't actually find any major problems when we went looking. Visits have also been made to the local taxi ranks in partnership with the civil parking enforcement team to ensure that these are being used properly and that non-licensed vehicles were not illegally parked. We didn't find any issues during those visits, but the civil parking enforcement team are continuing to visit and to keep an eye on those areas, and they can serve fixed penalty notices where appropriate. It's been a busy time in terms of delegated decisions, with 6 going to the Chief Officer. 3 licences were renewed, 2 were referred to panel, and 1 licence was revoked with immediate effect. The revocation concerned a driver about whom allegations of drug taking had been received, but who declined to take a drugs test. The 3 panel hearings saw a licence renewal, a new light vehicle and a replacement vehicle agreed by members, and a further report was withdrawn at the request of an applicant. A record of those drivers who have had licences refused or revoked has now been collated. Letters have been sent to those drivers whose details have been or will be included on the NR3 register, and we're coming on to discuss that in a bit more detail on another report later today. Access to the NR3 records has also now been included as part of our application process for drivers, and that really improves the ability of this authority to identify drivers who have been refused or revoked by other licensing authorities. So are there any queries or questions about taxi licensing?
5.22, 3 complaints related to inappropriate behaviour towards young girls. I know the drivers were immediately interviewed. The explanations indicated inadvisable rather than unacceptable. I mean, I know there's a fine line, but for them to complain, I think it's really worrying for 3 to have, to complain about that.
We respond absolutely immediately to these, but I think that even with the safeguards training, what happened was these drivers weren't aware that something they did in all innocence, in other cases, would be part of these girls being groomed. So, for example, one of the drivers gave a girl a cigarette, an underage girl. And we think, well, just a minute, cigarettes are often used as part of the grooming process. When we investigated further, what we found out was that this girl was known to be a smoker, including by the people who'd brought this to our attention. And what had happened is she'd turned around to the driver and said, "Oh, I'm out of cigarettes. I couldn't catch one off you, please." "Well, yeah, here you go." Because he knew she was a regular smoker as well. So it was kind of, when we said to him, "Well, look, do you realise that this is what it looks like, this could be grooming?" It was, "Oh, good grief, no, it was meant in all innocence. I didn't realise that it could look like that. Yeah, and I've really learned from that. No, I won't do that again." So, and when we went back to the people who were, responsible for and caring for that girl, they said, "Well, actually, no, that does sound like something she could have done." So they were happy with the explanation in this case. But as I've said, it was worth having that conversation with the driver so that he knows what he did off the cuff, so to speak, could have been interpreted much more seriously.
I mean, if she was underage, it's not a wise thing to do, even if he knew she was a smoker. You know what I mean? I think,
And he has taken that point on board. We made that very, very clear to him. But he had a 15-year-old who was a regular smoker, and he knew it. As he said, so it was just one of those that was just unthinking of. Oh yeah, he'll have one of mine. And he's now understood that he won't be doing that again. But it's also why we've given the written warning, because we've now got something on file that says we've got a record of what happened, we've got a record that he's been advised not to do it, so that if we have any further problems of this nature, we can begin to move things on.
Also, I got Councillor Evans and Councillor Hawler.
Yeah, my question is, with the driver with the drugs, what is the follow-on after that to everybody else driving taxis? Is there a follow-on procedure informing them, about drugs? And also the same one with the smoking, where a driver was fined smoking in a cab? I just want to know if it was a fault.
Right, in terms of allegations of drug taking, we do get these on occasion. It's actually not very common, but we either get comments from customers that they appear to be on drugs, and sometimes it's from other drivers as well that concerns are expressed to us. What we've done at the moment is that we invite those people in to discuss that with us. If we have any concerns, then we think, well, let's put this to bed. Let's make sure we're absolutely rock solid on this. We invite them in for a drugs test, and we have a company that'll come in and do that for us. What happens is if they refuse or to turn up, and we say we've had an allegation and they're not taking the test, what we've done then is said, well, we have to be sure that these are fit and proper people, so we revoke their licence until and unless they have taken a drugs test. If we offer this to them for free, if they haven't taken a drug test and we haven't paid a fee for them to do so, then they can do so at our cost. But if they have just not told us that they're not going to turn up, and we have paid a fee for the drugs, the testing company to be here, then what we say is the next one has to be at their expense. But they are offered the opportunity of a free drugs test to cover our backs and theirs. In terms of smoking, with the fixed penalty notices, we've actually got the civil parking and enforcement team having a look out for us now, and they're working with us in collaboration, so we can have a look at whether we've served a fixed penalty notice on them, but we'd take that forward to look at whether we need to bring their licence in for review, and certainly we've brought one to yourselves, and we've looked to do so where they declined to accept that they were smoking. And, you know, where they say, well, just a minute, we're saying you're smoking, and they're saying they didn't, then that would be brought to review, because they're not accepting guilt and they're not accepting that that problem occurred.
Thank you. Thank you, Alison. Councillor Hall has withdrawn his question now, so I want to continue with the reports. Thanks.
So gambling, smoking, street trading and charity collections have all been fairly straightforward. In terms of scrap metal, we did have one person who applied for a licence who was in the process of being prosecuted in terms of litter and fly tipping matter. He was found guilty of that offence. We have nevertheless issued him with a scrap metal collector's licence. I think firstly because the conditions on the licence and the matters we're able to take into account make it difficult for us not to, but also because it allowed us to almost formalise the situation with him, so that we know where he is and what he's doing, and we can keep a closer eye on him. So I think there were those points. Are there any other questions we have on those matters? No. Okay. Moving on to animal establishment licensing, I think there's just I've just outlined the complaints received and licences issued. Just to let you know that Lucy's Law comes into force in England in April 2020, and this is something that you as members may be asked about, because this is a law that will prohibit puppies and kittens from being sold by anybody except the person who bred those puppies or kittens. So third-party sales will now be prohibited in England, and that includes any pet shop or anybody else. In Wales, we are looking to have that legislation brought here. I know the Welsh Government are looking at that as a matter of urgency, but we don't have those powers yet. But it's something that is generating a lot of interest and a lot of question, and puppy breeding in particular and the standards of puppy breeding is a real hot potato at the moment. I'm dealing with lots of freedom of information requests about licensed premises, but in fact I think the real big issue is that the unlicensed premises and also those that fall outside of the licensing regime and we can't license. But what that means is we have to prove not only that they're selling puppies but that they should be licensed. And that's very, very difficult given the powers that we have at the moment. I did actually say that I'd give you a verbal update on this. Actually, there was a local authority meeting with the Chief Veterinary Officer for Wales on Tuesday on this, and they're looking very urgently at reviewing the dog breeding legislation in Wales to bring all of this together to give us greater powers. But it is something that as members you may find yourselves being asked about and also asked to give an opinion. Okay. Are there any other queries or questions on that? Okay. So moving on to some of the service requests then, just to say that we're now recording our service requests somewhat better and in a more focused way, so the numbers have jumped to really show that the work that we're doing, and we can report that there were 306 service requests right the way across the board over the first 6 months of the year. 27 of those were freedom of information requests, and those are really relating to animal licensing, dog breeding in particular, and dangerous wild animals and zoos, and also taxi matters. Those are the real hot potatoes in terms of the freedom of information requests that we're getting at the moment. So moving on just to say on 5.10.1, I'm just referring to Appendix 1 that's showing the overall workload figures for the year to date, reporting that we are ahead of schedule on some of the things, and particularly in terms of the Licensing Act 2003, and we are responding to complaints very, very quickly at the moment. A lot of our work is planned for the second half of the year, and that we are planning to achieve that programme, providing staffing levels remain stable. I'll come on to that in a minute. Okay, when I wrote this report, I think it was I'd put in the wellbeing report at the end as Appendix 2, so I think it might have gone in as a different order. Okay. Just to say then, the only expected issue that we're going to have is with scrap collector inspections. It's very difficult to get fined and to get hold of the scrap metal collectors. They're out and about on the streets. They're very difficult to find out there, and when we write to them, they don't have a good record of coming in to see us. Historically, some of them actually probably don't even know what the letter is that we've sent to them, and we do actually have to fill in the application forms for some of these people, so it isn't that they're ignoring us, it's just that they are very difficult to get hold of, and we are still intending to look at 80% of them if we can. We think it's important for us to do that, but we do have our difficulties in achieving that. So are there any queries or questions on that section? Thank you. Just moving on to the management matters then. Looking at the Constitution, we've got a report coming to you at the end of this meeting about how this committee is formatted. Just to say that we will also need to be looking at the Constitution in terms of the fact that the collaboration with Blaenau Gwent will be ending at the end of this month, so there will be some changes around there. Looking at the policies, we will need to be doing the Licensing Act 2003 policy, and I'm going to be reporting on that one in a minute. I've also included under that section that there is guidance for members in respect of modern slavery, which has now been issued by the Local Government Association, and I have attached that for you. It is something that we come up against, and I think particularly when we're looking at some of the immigration issues, but also some of the other inspections that we do, that we're having to consider whether people are there from choice, or whether there are some more serious underlying matters. Okay, so that could be applicable to any of the reports coming to you, so you may need to bear that in mind. If there is a specific issue that we're aware of, we will bring that to your attention in any report that we bring to you. The other policy that's going to be coming to you shortly is the power, looking at the power to licence premises for acupuncture, tattooing, ear piercing and electrolysis. Now this actually falls to yourselves in terms of policy development, etc. But it's something that is at the moment years and years old, so you probably don't have any recollection of doing anything in respect of this. And it's also, the enforcement is dealt with by the Food Health and Safety team, not ourselves. However, the legislation is changing, and in terms of licensing reviews, etc., what's going to happen under the new legislation is that where we refuse applications or we want to revoke applications, those will now be coming to yourselves. And a report explaining all of that will be with you shortly, probably at the next committee, but certainly before that legislation comes into force. And also just an update on the charity collection and sex shop establishment policies. Obviously, we had intended to bring those before yourselves, but with the changes to the collaboration, other work that's going on, and the fact that I'm going at the end of this month does mean that those are currently on hold. So I apologise for that, but I think that is something that will take a little bit of time now before it comes before you. Are there any queries or questions in terms of the policies at the moment?
Councillor.
Am I allowed to ask the reason why we've not working with Blaine Gwent no more?
That was a decision made by the Chief Officer. I think that did go to Cabinet, so it has been looked at by members. Yeah. So I think that it was just a question of a number of different issues that were ongoing in terms of how that collaboration moved forward. And I think that the reality was that we were at the stage that we had to either move forward towards a total collaboration with the two, with the joint services, or we had to step back from that. So it was, it was at the stage where we'd tried it for as long as we could, but it wasn't continuing to work in its current format.
Thank you.
So moving on then, fees, all of those, I won't cover those reports are coming to you separately. Collaboration, is just to let you know, as I said, that is ending. I had put in here just a little bit of information about the new management structure. I'll just cover that here. What will happen is, with the management coming back in-house, instead of managers such as myself managing 2 teams here and at Blaine Gwent, what we're going to have now is a new management structure with team leaders that manage 2 teams here. And I believe that the appointment process will be next week now for a new team leader for trading standards and licensing. The team leader for environmental health, which is the public health teams and the food health and safety teams, that appointment was made this week. And there's a process ongoing at the moment to appoint a head of public protection that will have an overview of the service as a whole. So that's the structure that's been put in place at the moment. Just moving on to say, I'm pleased to report no complaints against surfers at the moment. Always good news. And looking at the forward plans, we will obviously come to you with the forward plan for the licensing team, but I'm going to suggest that at the moment what we're looking at is largely unchanged from the year before and indeed the year before that. I think that's working fairly well for us, but if at any stage you feel that there needs to be a different focus or we need to be looking at a different way of working, then it's going to be open to yourselves to come to us and to have that discussion at any time. Although we have a workload plan for the year, it can be changed as the year goes on. And the common one for us is that new legislation comes in suddenly, or we have a major problem that we have to resolve, and we'll discuss that through the year. We're also looking at a forward plan for yourselves in terms of the reports that are coming to this committee. And what we've got at the moment for coming to you, hopefully in February, is reporting back to you on the taxi licence fee consultation and fee approval. reporting to you on the general licence fees and seeking your approval, reporting a draft amended licensing policy for your consideration, and also a special procedures update, and that's the skin piercing and tattooing report that I've just mentioned. We've got workload reports then coming to you for May and October, so we're continuing with the twice yearly, if that's acceptable to yourselves, and with July looking at the scrutiny of the draft licensing policy, so that can be reported up. I believe it's to Cabinet. Is it to Cabinet? Council. It's to full council for their approval. So that's what we have in at the moment. But obviously, if there's anything additional that you'd like to be brought to your attention, then we can put that in the workload plan for yourselves. Okay. And I think that's just about the end of what we need to discuss then in terms of that report. Thank you.
Thank you, Alison, for another brilliant report, and well done to the team for all your hard work. It's really appreciated by the committee. If there's no questions, members, any questions? Right, the recommendations are on page 20 of the pack, and the recommendations are that the licensing committee note and comment on the contents of this report, and 2, note the activity report for April to September. You're all happy on that? Are you all in agreement? Yeah. Thank you. Right, we'll move on then to agenda item 5, which is approval of proposed taxi licence fees 2020-21 for consultation, pages 91 to 112. I'll hand back over to Alison. Thank you.
This is looking at the taxi licence fees for consultation. This is something that you will have been discussing fairly recently, as you may get a sense of déjà vu, but this is an annual thing, so we need to be looking at this again. And the other point to make is, although you've only just discussed it probably at the last committee, in fact what we've done is we've actually deliberately brought that forward so that we've got longer for the consultation process and longer for yourselves to consider the outcome of that consultation. So looking at this, I'm going to skip quickly over the background because we have been looking at this before. So it's just to confirm, I think the important thing to confirm here is on 4.3, which is the calculated costs are based on budgeted salary and other costs for 2021 in terms with the Council's medium-term service and financial plan. However, the central service apportionment and direct costs are actually based on this current year because we don't have next year's figures available to us yet. And what this means is that we can't actually say what the actual costs of delivering the service will be next year because we don't have those figures available yet. So what we've done is the best we can with the figures that we do have. It means it's slightly underreporting the costs, but that isn't a bad thing in terms of the fact that we need to be undercharging rather than overcharging. We can't be seen to be overcharging, so that's it's kind of built into the system really. Under 5 and 5.1.1, I've covered the legislation and guidance, and that is as in previous reports, but obviously if you've got any queries, come back to me on that one. And in 5.1.2, I've just referred to how we reviewed these annually and the processes that we follow, and again that's as in all of the previous reports that we brought before you, and obviously if there are any questions on the underlying process, I'm happy to ask those. If there are any queries at this stage. Thank you. In 5.1.3, I've just underlined the things that we've looked at in terms of budget building and fee building, and those are the underpinning costs such as developing policies and procedures, the specific licence steps so it takes us 5 minutes to do this and 10 minutes to do that in order to actually deliver the function and the licence, and then looking at the hourly operational costs for each officer, but that's just not their direct wages and on costs, it's also the costs of providing the building, providing the management structure, and the democratic services and all of the other things that underpin the work that we do. So that is as it's been in previous years. So if we move on to 5.2, look at the fees themselves. In 5.2.1, I've referred to, is it Appendix 1, have we changed that round again? Is Appendix 1 the wellbeing strategy again? Right. Okay. 109. Thank you. So if you look on page 109, yes, we've got the it's what's now Appendix 2, which is comparable licence fee data, we've also got the actual fees then on 109, which is for the drivers for vehicles, private hire operators, etc. And what I've shown you is what we're charging this year. I've shown you the licence fee determination and also the enforcement costs separately. We don't have to for this particular legislation, but I feel it's still useful to do so. And then in the final column is the actual licence fee that people will be paying to us when they come to us for that service. Okay. So,
Nelson, I'm looking on page 111, page 111. It says our proposed fees are £282, but that's quite a bit higher than the other authorities. I think Blaenau y Gwent is 270, Caerphilly 253, Newport 249, Monmouth 244, and it's got ours at 282. Is there a reason why ours is a lot higher than the other authorities?
I think that sometimes that we're not always comparing like for like. I would be more worried if we were on 282 and somebody was on 509 and someone else was on 103. I think the fact that we're all in the 200s is fairly indicative that we're charging roughly the same thing. I think also some people, for example, are charging some things as part of the licence fee, whereas others charge things separately. So, for instance, Blaenau y Gwent had seen to be charging slightly less than us, but when somebody comes to them for their DBS check, they charge for the administration of that DBS check as part of that fee, whereas we just charge them what we're charged for the DBS check, but we charge for all the administration of that as part of our overall fee. So do you see that sometimes people are charging things in different ways, and also we do different work at different times in different ways to different extents, so there's always going to be a little bit of a difference in the way that these things end up at the end.
That's awesome. I just thought I'd highlight it because if I was somebody applying for a licence, the first thing I'd be saying is, well, why are we higher? But when you explain it, perhaps you'd have that somewhere in a minute so that people could actually read it and say, well, Torfane's is higher because they don't charge for a DBS check where the other authorities do.
Chair, could I also comment? Firstly, we don't know where the other boroughs are in reviewing their fees. So that could have been done some time ago. It lasts for a number of years. It could be that we're starting this process ahead of anybody else. Also, it is going to be dependent on fees, as Alison said. Also, please note that we are a different sized borough, and also there are different issues for us in comparison to others. Chair, that's all I really want to make a comment on in relation to that.
Although I think we do roughly the same things in roughly the same ways as the other authorities on this one. I've got other licences where we charge for doing inspections with the vet, and other people are just posting out the licence without any checks. So there can be some real considerable differences in the work. Also, for the larger authorities, those underpinning costs of doing policies and procedures, those are shared out between more licence holders. So, there are economies of scales in the larger authorities. Okay, so if we look at the fees, actually quite a few of them are unchanged or largely unchanged, and this is because the hourly rate that we've been given for this year is the same as for last year. So if the work hasn't changed and our hourly rate hasn't been changed, then the fee hasn't changed. Some of the fees have gone up since they were last calculated, and the reasons are as follows. So in terms of the driver's licence, so that cost has gone up. It was previously accepted that local authorities could charge for enforcement as part of the overall administration of the licensing function. And our view is, if we're issuing a licence, then enforcing that licence is part of the licensing function. Why just give people a piece of paper to say they can do something if not enforcing to make sure they're doing it properly and safely, particularly when our role is protecting public safety. However, there was a court case, and it was found in that court case that the drivers, the ability to include that isn't specifically included in legislation, and therefore we can't charge it. So what we did was we then reviewed our costs to make sure that was excluded. What we did was we looked at all of the costs for drivers, and what we found was that yes, we excluded the enforcement costs, but in fact the review of some of the other costs that we were incurring actually showed that we were doing more of other work that we hadn't been charging for, and in fact the overall fee was higher than we were charging for. We decided not to go through the advertising process again. That's obviously quite cumbersome and expensive, but it does mean that at this stage we're now saying no, the work that we're doing is greater, and even though we're not charging for the enforcement, the other work that we're doing means that that fee has gone up slightly. Just to let you know on that, the Local Government Association has picked this up. They're very worried about the fact we can't charge for this enforcement. There has been quite a bit of discussion and debate within local authorities, as you might imagine. They're doing a survey of local authorities at the moment to assess the loss of income around driver enforcement activities. And we've done a submission to them that on our estimated cost, which is around £7,500 per annum, that we think that we're going to be incurring the costs because we're doing that work, but we can't recharge for it. Okay. So we are hoping that the ability to charge for enforcement will be included as part of any new legislation. And prior to that legislation changing, that cost is not recoverable at the moment. And unfortunately, the UK government has recently commented that as part of the Queen's speech that they're not looking to review the UK legislation at the moment. So we're just still hopeful that Wales will move forward with that. Looking at the costs of the private hire operators, these have increased due to a review of the likely workloads. And I think this is really where a new large private hire operator applies. What we've learnt from that is that we are then asked to do a considerable amount of work and to respond to a considerable number of queries, concerns and complaints, etc., which in this case weren't actually found to be any fault of the operator who was applying. It was the existing operators that we had the issue was, and that was a lot of work for us. And what we've done is we've placed that into the fee setting so that it's reflected over a period of time. They're not being charged for it immediately, but what we're saying is over a period of time, if we have any large operators come into the system, we would expect to be dealing with a lot of work, and we have reflected that. So that covers the work that we've already done that we're allowed to recharge for, and reflects that this will be done in the future as well. And if, for instance, somebody like Uber came into the area and applied, we would be expecting that to have a considerable impact on our workloads. Looking at vehicle licence costs, these remain unchanged. And in fact, because we've changed the way that the MOT garages now operate and charge, what's happening now is they're charging drivers and vehicle owners directly for the MOTs instead of us invoicing, charging them and then paying the invoices. What had happened between the two garages is that we equalised it out so that everybody was paying the same, but the drivers now, vehicle operators now have the choice of going to the garage of their choice, and one is cheaper than another. So in fact, if they go to the cheaper garage, they've got an opportunity now to save a bit of money, which is always helpful to the trade.
With the MOT, if it fails, are they going to pay a retest fee until I'm guaranteed?
that is set by the garages themselves, but the retests are covered as part of that arrangement, and they don't get licensed until they've been retested if they failed. So, that is all in the place. But what it means is that those vehicle owners now pay up front for the tests when they have those tests done, instead of paying at the licence application point. And it means that we're going to be less involved in invoicing once this system has worked through, and everybody who has paid up front has gone through the system. So I think it'll be more economic for ourselves and for the trade in the long term. Okay. Under 5.2.7, I've just highlighted how many applications we have and how many renewals we expect in any given year. That's just for your information. But that then moves forward into the financial impact. We can start to work out how much we gain or lose in terms of fee changes. And what you can see in 5.2.8 is that we're expecting a slight increase in licence fees in terms of private hire and driver applications, but it is minimal. We've already referred to the comparison with these fees against neighbouring authorities. And what I've actually highlighted here is that there are differences, and this is because the fees are calculated differently and do not always cover the same things. Nevertheless, they are roughly in line. There aren't any glaring differences, I feel, not compared to some of our other licensing regimes anyway, that actually looks, to me, compared to some of the other regimes, to be reasonably in line. So, before we move on to wheelchairs and electric vehicles, are there any queries so far? So what we've then got is a couple of discussions around whether we give reductions on fees. In 5.2.11, I've highlighted that you've previously agreed a reduction in fees for wheelchair accessible vehicles, and that's at the moment £80 in respect of new applications and £70 for renewal applications. And what we're asking is whether you wish to continue offering that discount, and if so, the level of that discount. I've highlighted that a discount is beneficial in demonstrating our support for the provision of wheelchair accessible vehicles. But we do need to fund that from general funds. If we do decide to give that refund, we can't then recharge that to other people who are seeking a licence.
Members, you in agreement for a reduction in the licence fees for disabled vehicles?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Moving on then to licence fees for electric and other low and zero emission vehicles. This is something that you asked at the last meeting for some more information on in order to make a decision on whether to offer a refund. We have been looking at our numbers, and what we can see is at the moment we have a small number of licensed hybrid vehicles. I think we've had half a dozen or so, although in fact we've had an extra 2 within the last 2 weeks, so this is something that the trade are picking up on. However, one issue is that, particularly for short journeys, what we're looking at is that these vehicles are more likely to be using fuel rather than electric on the short journeys that they might make. The electric use is really, I think, of more benefit on the longer journeys. Whilst electric vehicles are becoming notably better in terms of affordability and range, we've been looking at the Professional Driver's Buyer's Guide for August 2019, and we can provide that to you if anybody's interested. It makes good reading. And this recognised that many models would still be, and I quote, hard pushed to do a working shift on a single charge. And that the recharging infrastructure is not at all uniform across the UK. In fact, we've had some very recent media coverage on this that has shown that it's very, very patchy, and that Wales has been doing particularly poorly in respect of that. Although I think that we are now looking in council car parks to actually make provision for that. Prices for new electric vehicles capable of the longest ranges, and I've looked at going to Heathrow from Torvine as an example, on a single charge, and they're typically over £70,000 at the moment on the new price. And the Professional Driver's Buyer's Guide was working out that was an estimated cost per mile, taking depreciation and everything into account, over 52 pence a mile. The cheapest private hire vehicle listed in that guide, they reckoned that would cost under £12,000 new, with an overall cost of 23 pence per mile. So you can still see that for the trade there is a significant difference between electric and diesel vehicles, and I think a lot of that is in terms of the upfront cost of buying the vehicles. In fact, one of our private hire operators has been looking at this, but I think it's fair to say that they have not come back to us with an application. The other difficulty we have is that very few of our vehicles are licensed from new. And because the most suitable vehicles are only just coming onto the market, they're not available second-hand for the trade. So that's going to be something it will come in time, but I think it is something that will take a year or two at least. So I think the other thing to look at is, whilst the focus in terms of clean air and the environment has traditionally been on greenhouse gases and putting in electric vehicles to reduce those, what we're now reading is that pollution from particulate matters must also be taken into account. And the UK Government's Air Quality Expert Group has recently said that particulates from brake wear, tyre wear and road surface wear also contribute to well over half of particulate pollution from road transport. And what they're recognising is that even an all-electric, self-driving road fleet won't eliminate particulates completely. So I think we have, a lot of, distance to go on actually ensuring clean air. Despite all of those issues, a number of local authorities and businesses are looking to promote the use of electric vehicles, and it's just worth noting that the Traffic Commissioner for Wales, they recently identified this as a factor that they saw in actually wishing to remove taxi enforcement from local authorities, because they thought that we weren't being proactive enough in promoting electric vehicle taxi fleets. A number of the local authorities and taxi fleets are moving forward on this. For example, one company in Cornwall have now a 13 taxi fleet. It's pure electric vehicles that they're running. They said that it's done 174,000 miles with no breakdowns and minimal service costs. 30% battery deterioration, but otherwise that car was as good as the day they bought it. And I would say that that is something that we are looking at. Although I would just say that I do know somebody whose car has just died on the motorway, and it had done considerable mileage, but not necessarily compared to diesel, but when it died thoroughly. So perhaps some of the issues around replacing battery, you can just put in a new engine. If the bodywork is good, you don't necessarily have that option. So there are some other issues around repairing electric vehicles. Coventry City Council has launched a Go Electric taxi.
I'm sorry to break in, but what you said on 5.215 about the reduction in fees for pure electric vehicles, if we decide as a committee to start looking into that, what type of cost impact would that have on the actual taxi fees? Or would we be able to reduce it very much? Or?
Well, at the moment, it would have none, because we don't have any. Okay. I think it's also worth pointing that we can, if we do go down this route, we can, we're already set up to MOT them and test them. In fact, one of our garages actually runs their own electric fleet in terms of the garage vans that are running around. At the moment, and what I'm trying to say is at the moment, if you do decide to go down that route, we don't have any. There is therefore zero cost at the moment. But you would be giving a clear signal that you're encouraging the trade. But what we're saying is that with these new vehicles coming in that are getting better and better, we would anticipate that over the next next few years we'd begin to see a pickup of electric vehicles. So it could be something for the future, but at the moment I would say that the impact is likely to be minimal.
Chair, if I could just, if I could just interrupt at this stage. This is obviously a topic that you're going to be interested in, and other local authorities, as you can see, have really been very proactive in relation to it. Alison's updating you, really, today in relation to this because you've asked a question. But could I respectfully suggest that perhaps this is looked into separately. It would enable the licensing team to discuss this with the chief officer because it really is a different message that we would want to be sending out to the trade. This can then be fed back in a separate report to yourselves, and then you would have a variety of options as to what sort of message you want to send out to the trade. So, for example, you know, it's going to tie in with the council's wish to put charging points in car parks. But it enables everyone to have a proper discussion in relation to it. So whilst this information is useful today, can I ask that suggestions aren't put forward as to what is done? That should really be in a separate report to you.
I think I'd done this as part of this report because it's part of the fee consideration, and I think that this is now for the coming year. We're going to be advertising our fee structure. It can be that we can introduce a reduction at any stage during the year. I think it's fair to say that I don't think anyone in the trade is going to argue if we're reducing fees, but if you want to advertise that as part of the overall fee structure, that would be a decision that would need to be made today.
I like the sound of it all, yeah, but 4 days ago there was a big write-up in Torvine installing on electric car infrastructure. So I think we've got a lot of work to do.
I think that the reality is that if a private hire operator decided to go down the electric route, they wouldn't be looking at public provision. They'd be looking at having their provision, as our garage does, on their own premises that everybody can plug in there. And I think that actually for a lot of the trade, it isn't going to be a case of whether they can plug in Torvine, because they can always go back to their yard or the home and plug in there. The problem will be if they drive to Heathrow or Gatwick, can they plug in there to get home again? So I think it's a much wider picture than just looking at Torvine and whether we've got suitable provision here. What we're looking at is that provision is coming online. For instance, for the car that I've mentioned with Tesla, the other thing to bear in mind is that some of the Teslas, I understand, need different charging provision. So that's another question entirely. But also, I think that those cars are sold with charging points, so that whoever buys the car would have somewhere to charge in their yard or wherever they park that vehicle. We do have a wider point, and I think this is something that has been taken on board right the way across the UK at a government level, which is if you have a one-man band or any person who wishes to own an electric vehicle, they're going to have difficulty in the valleys when they're parking 2 doors down because they can't park outside their door. How do they then charge their vehicle? So this is part of a wider conversation, but I think that for yourselves, perhaps the consideration will be, do you want to be seen to be encouraging electric vehicle use in the taxi trade in the same way that you're encouraging wheelchair vehicle provision, or is this something that you'd wish to look at in more detail? But as I said, this is, when we're just looking at the taxi trade, it's part of a very much bigger picture.
So, sorry, Chair, if I could just...
What amazed me is the difference in price running an electric car and running a normal car. I just can't believe that it's so dear to run an electric vehicle.
Just to suggest that we move on, just concentrate on the fees. We can agenda this again in the new year for the committee.
I think the difficulty is just to to say is that I've actually done quite a bit of work in bringing this information in relation to taxis. I think that particularly over the next, I would have to highlight that with me going with the new person coming in and with the staffing issues that we have at the moment, and also the fact that a lot of what you want to discuss will relate to taxis, it'll be part of a very much wider picture in terms of provision in council car parks and what vehicles are looking like, and whether there's going to be anywhere at Heathrow. There's going to be that's a much bigger picture to report back to yourselves on, and I'm thinking that it may be some. I would advise that it may be some time before we can come back to you with that information, and it may also be that that's something that would need to be considered on a wider council basis rather than just in terms of taxi provision.
Alison, can I just ask then, so today what you're asking members to make a decision on is whether there is a reduction for electric motor vehicles. So are you asking this is exactly the same as disabled motor vehicles? Right, thank you.
We need to make a decision then whether we offer a reduction for...
I this is the ideal opportunity to discuss this with members now, because by the time you get to the recommendation, you'll just be reading through it. This enables their members to make the comment that they want in relation to it. It's just whether basically they agree with that proposal.
Do you agree with a reduction for electric vehicles? Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I think that we're just about finished in terms of the report then. I have just covered where we're looking to offer refunds and just giving you this information on that. We're not required to give refunds, but it is good practice to do so. And I've outlined, on the ill health of the applicant or the death of the applicant, circumstances that we need to do that. In terms of the budgetary implications, I've already covered that it'll be a small budgetary implication. It's just to let you perhaps know under then section 7, because it's the consultation on what happens next. It's just to keep you informed of that. What we're required to do is to give at least 28 days consultation. What we'd do is advertise the fees that you've agreed today in a local newspaper, and then we bring that back to yourselves for consideration. So whatever fees and fee reductions you agree today, we will advertise those. Any comments will be brought back to yourselves at the February meeting, and then you'll be able to have another discussion before agreeing the fees for the next financial year.
Right, thank you, Alison. Right, the recommendations are on page 100 of your agenda pack, the report. 13.1, members are asked to consider the taxi licensing fees and either approve the proposed taxi licensing fees for consultation, or 1B, should they not approve the proposed fees, indicate the fees that should be consulted upon. Right, so do we all agree on approving the proposed taxi licensing fees consultation? Yeah, on agreement. Right, we've also got 13.2, which is indicate whether reduction of the licence fee in respect of disabled access vehicles and or electrical vehicles should be offered. Right, so all in agreement? We already answered that anyway. Thank you. We move on now on to item number 6, which is policy in respect of requests for NR3. Put it shortly, it's on pages 113, 134. So hand over to you, Alison, to the report on NR3.
Thank you, Chair. This is just moving on from something that we brought to you previously, just to update you and to put a policy in place that underpins some of the things that we've been discussing in the past. We've mentioned the NR3 register to you. What this is it's a register kept by the National Anti-Fraud Network, and what this is doing is recording any driver who has had a licence refused or revoked. What we've got a situation at the moment is taxi drivers are able to make an application to any local authority, and what we have as a situation is if they refuse to revoke, they can then go to the next door authority to that, etc. And it's a case of what do you do to share that information. I said the National Register of Taxi Licence Refusals and Revocations has been developed to try and stop that. It helps to prevent drivers just going around until they can find a local authority to approve it. We've actually had I've referred to one case, but in fact we've had a couple now, where somebody refused by another authority has come to ourselves. Fortunately, he'd been refused by us as well previously, so we knew about that one. But that particular driver had been refused by someone else and came to us, we didn't have that information. And part of the problem is that we have the GPS which shows criminal convictions, but we don't always have other intelligence and information which would be taken into account when deciding whether to issue a licence or revoke a licence. So the NR3 register really has two important advantages. It allows us to check for the information and intelligence that may not even be on a DBS check, but also it's not dependent on the honesty of applicants to reveal that they've been refused or revoked in another authority. We came to you in July 2019 to inform you that we'd signed up to the NR3 register, and what's happened since then is that all drivers have been informed that this NR3 will be used by this authority, and they've been given information on that process and told what it's all about. What we've done is we've included information on that in any report coming to yourselves that could lead to a refusal or revocation, so that you and the applicant or licence holder have been aware that that is the case. What we're doing at the moment is informing those who have previously had their licence refused or revoked of what the NR3 register is and why their details are going to be entered on there. Any information that is sought by us or provided by us is actually controlled and governed by the data protection legislation, so there are very tight controls on what we can give and what we can ask. It can only be sought or provided by a duly authorised officer. It can only be sought or provided for an appropriate reason, and in this case it's very clearly the prevention of crime, and it's any information that we hold or seek has to be held securely and disposed of in accordance with data protection legislation. And that basically means you have to put that information somewhere safe, but it can't be accessed by any improper person, and then dispose of it as soon as we've finished with it. As part of that process, local authorities have been advised to adopt a policy to provide further clarity on how data will be obtained, held and provided. And a draft policy was provided by the national body for that purpose. What we've done is we've taken that draft policy and we've adopted it for use by this authority, and that's now attached as Appendix 1. So it's just going to be a case of going through that with yourselves and making sure that you're happy with that and asking whether you approve the use of that policy. Okay. So as I said, it is fairly straightforward in terms of the policy itself. It all complies with the data protection legislation. We have spoken to our data protection officer in respect of that to make sure that it all complies, and I think it is all in itself fairly simple and straightforward. But if you've got any queries or questions, I'm happy to answer those.
Thank you, Alison. The recommendations are on page 116. I just want clarification on the recommendations that it says in 12.2 indicates how its members wish to interact with this process. Do you mean like set up a subcommittee or what does it actually refer to?
My apologies. That's what comes of trying to move all of the old reports into the new format in a fairly short period of time. Yes, but if I can confirm, it's just to ask whether members are whether they accept the adoption of the policy.
Right then, members, recommendations, it says on page 116, number 14. Are you all happy to note the proposed timetable? Okay, all in favour? Thank you then. We move on to item number 7, which is review of the Licensing Act 2003, statement of the licensing policy, which is on pages 135 to 216. What's it?
Thank you, Chair. I think hopefully this one will be fairly brief. It's just to introduce a little bit of reading for you over the Christmas period when you've nothing else to do. If we just look at moving in on, what I've done is I've outlined in section 5 the background to the Licensing Act 2003 and the requirement for this each licensing authority to review their policy under the Licensing Act 2003 on a 5-yearly basis. What we've got then, I've also referred to the revised guidance, which is actually saying how we should carry out that process. And just to let you know then, under issues and findings, that we are at that time again where we have to begin the review process. So what we have is that the current policy came into effect on the 1st of November 2015, and it must therefore be reviewed and a new policy approved on or before the 1st of November of next year. Now that does seem a long way away, but in fact there's a lot of things that we are obliged to do in that time. Okay, so what we've done in 5.2 is just advise you of the time frame for each of these stages. So to let you know that by January of next year, we'll have developed a draft statement of policy in partnership with the other grant authorities, responsible authorities, and yourselves. Approval of the draft statement of policy will come to the next statutory licensing committee, and that will be in February of next year. We will then have a 3-month consultation period. We're obliged to have that 3-month period. In June, July of next year, we're going to be looking at the responses that have come back to us and considered those. And then in July of next year, we'll be coming back to yourselves with the final draft of the statement of policy for you to have a scrutiny of the consultation process and of our final draft. Then in September, the final draft will go to the full council for approval, and then it can commence in November of next year. So that's the timetable that we're going to be following. And that is fairly well laid down in statute, and that's how it has to really fit in with the committee cycles and etc. So there's not a lot of leeway in changing that. We just wanted to bring this to your attention so that you're able to comment on the draft statement of policy during the consultation stage and as part of the the beginning steps of this process. So what we've done is we've attached the draft policy to this report for your information, so you can read through to us and then let us know if there's anything you think we need to be doing right at this stage in terms of changes to that policy. It'll be Claire reading on this. So if we let Claire know, or just send anything to the licensing@torvine.gov.uk general mail inbox, and whoever's dealing with this at that time will pick it up and respond to you.
Thank you, Alison. Any questions, comments, members? Right then, we go to the recommendations, which is on page 138 of the agenda. The Licensing Committee note the proposed timetable and indicates how its members wish to interact with this process. You all happy? Okay?
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Right, we move on to the item 8, which is amendments to the licensing parts of the Constitution, pages 217 to 244.
Thank you very much, Chair. I won't take up much of your time, members. I've spent a long time looking at appendices 13 and also appendices 10 and 7. And in essence, as you know from being in Council, the Constitution is a live document. It's something that has got to constantly change because it's got to reflect what's happening within the Council. In relation to licensing, just for ease of reference and to make things more straightforward, it's been deemed appropriate to have two committees to reflect what is statutory and what is general. So this does not impact on you or the chair, so there doesn't have to be two separate committees. You can hear everything. It's just the way we organise the committee and also the papers. So what you'll find is a little bit more work for the licensing team and for Democratic Services, but two committee papers have to be presented to you. So in due course, what you'll find, instead of having one thick committee agenda, the associated papers, you will have two, because it will just reflect what is statutory and what is general. So there you are, members. In essence, that's what this is about. So therefore, I'm just asking you to comment, if you wish, on this, but also that you approve the two committee structures.
Thank you. Members, any questions or comments on this report? Councillor?
Two separate committees, so we've got this committee and we've got the end of the committee as well.
What will happen is that at 10 o'clock you'll have the statutory committee, for example, and straight after you will have the general committee. So it is the same one. So I'm not asking you to attend anything in addition. It's just the way we constitute the committees. This has got to go to Council after this as well, because all amendments of the Constitution have got to go to Council. But as committee, I'm asking you to divide the work into two committees.
Everybody happy? Yeah. No? Okay, then the recommendations are on page 219 of the report. The recommendations, want me to read through them all? No? Okay. Thanks for that, it's quite lengthy. Are you all in agreement? Right. Thank you, members. Right, and finally, the last item, item 9, which is date of the next meeting, which is 13th of February 2020. So thank you all for your attendance. The meeting is now closed. Thank you. Thank you. Very